first option regarding Cain's offering, that it was a quality species, namely flax, but min hagarua, the rejects, the poorest of that flax crop, we can now turn to and address one of the original questions that was asked, namely, given the fact that Cain was the first of the brothers to make an offering, if his intent was to bring the poorest of his crop, an offering that could be misconstrued by God as an act of disrespect, why then did he even bother to bring this mincha la Hashem? To which we might respond that Cain might have had his own rationalization on the basis that the species that he was bringing was a quality species. And while he was actually offering the leftovers, the poorest of his crop, he still nevertheless, from the standpoint of the species, was making a bona fide mincha la Hashem. From the standpoint of God, however, this was the poorest of his crop, and therefore ve'el Cain ve'el minchato lo sha'ah. God rejected that offering, which then explains the second part of the original question as to Cain knowing full well that his offering was somewhat substandard. Why did he become angry? Vayichar leCain ma'od, and the answer is because Cain, from his perspective, had made a quality offering. The species was worthy of an offering and therefore should not have been rejected by God. So what this boils down to ultimately is a clash between God's reckoning and man's reckoning. Man, Cain, made a value judgment that the offering should have been acceptable. God, on the other hand, for whatever reason, treated this offering from Cain as a substandard and therefore took the position that the offering needed to be rejected. This understanding of Rashi that the species was a quality species, but poorest of his crop, leaves us with two difficulties. One weaker, one stronger. Firstly, the weaker difficulty. Clearly there was no intent on the part of Cain to do something that was disrespectful or an affront to God. Why then did Cain bring min hagarua, the poorest of his crop? It's not a rock-solid question, as one can inject a third component, as we shall shortly demonstrate from the narrative, the component of the Yetzer Hara. A more problematic issue is from the standpoint of God, that if there was no intent on the part of Cain to be disrespectful, as evidenced in the fact that he brought a quality species, why then did God reject Cain's offering? And it will be in response to this question, Rashi, or at least according to some versions of Rashi, offers an alternative justification for the rejection of Cain's offering, that it was not necessarily a quality product, flax, and the rejection came about on account of its being min hagarua, substandard, and leftovers, but rather Cain's offering was whatever was available at the time. Cain's sin was one of indifference in his dealings with God, and for this reason God reciprocated by rejecting that offering. Cain, for his part, did not accept responsibility, take ownership of his shortcomings, but rather transferred his anger over to God, which ultimately led to the murder of Hevel. So that the focus of this storyline is not the issue of jealousy, but rather one of not taking full responsibility and ownership of one's actions.